Former Harvard president Claudine Gay shared her side of the story in an op-ed released in the New York Times Wednesday evening, arguing that the campaign to oust her from the university was, quote, merely a single skirmish in a broader war to unravel public faith in pillars of American society. Gay says she made mistakes while in her role, but denied claims she misrepresented research or plagiarized others' work. Gay, like anti-racist scholar Ibram X. Kendi and Reverend Al Sharpton, said that racism played a role in her ousting. Quote, it is not lost on me that I make an ideal canvas for projecting every anxiety about the generational and demographic changes unfolding on American campuses. A Black woman selected to lead a storied institution, someone who views diversity as a source of institutional strength and dynamism, someone who has advocated a modern curriculum that spans from the frontier of quantum science to the long-neglected history of Asian Americans, someone who believes that a daughter of Haitian immigrants has something to offer to the nation's oldest university. In a rather surprising twist of events, Times opinion editor Kathleen Kingsbury encouraged readers to read guest essays on the Harvard incident to find out what really happened. Kingsbury wrote, as opinion editor, I rarely express my own views publicly on guest essays we publish, but here it's worth saying that in the current conversation around Harvard, I've been more drawn to arguments made by others.
But the plot thickens. Journalist Li Feng revealed that before Gay was set to testify to the House Committee on Education, an extensively documented 6,000-word dossier on Claudine Gay was anonymously shopped to journalists. The dossier formed the basis of many plagiarism allegations that later led to her downfall. Lee accuses a campaign by pro-Israel voices as responsible in an effort to take down several university leaders for failing to crack down on pro-Palestinian activists. As Bree and Robbie covered yesterday, Gay will remain at Harvard in a teaching capacity, receiving a nearly $900,000 a year salary. So very fascinating, but not surprising. Of course, we know that Liz McGill, who was president of the University of Pennsylvania, also testified on the floor of Congress on anti-Semitism. But really what it ended up being was this kind of testimony around students being critical of Israel on campus, that being labeled as anti-Semitic, and them asking the university professors, or presidents rather, if they would tamp down on that rhetoric, if they would punish students for being pro-Israel. That's a ridiculous thing to ask university presidents to do. But of course, they didn't get the answers they wanted. And the result was then Ross Stevens, a very wealthy guy, paying $100 million to the university, threatening to retract that donation unless Liz McGill resigned, essentially buying her position because she didn't have the political views he wanted. And then in the case of Harvard, you have the same kind of alleged plagiarism that Bill Ackman's wife did. It was a passage in her thesis that she did not quote, but the passage, that was 4 paragraphs, was directly stolen from other writers. So it was a technicality, right? She did credit the other writers' work throughout the paper, just as Claudine Gay did, but didn't attribute the quotes. Same exact situation. Claudine Gay's was reviewed by the university, by Harvard, no conduct violations found. So really what this is bullying. This is some other kind of excuse used to get her out of office because what? They couldn't buy her. Harvard has enough money, but it worked in the case of UPenn. Very obvious that there are pro-Israel voices behind this, trying to quell students from learning about the situation in Israel-Palestine.
Yeah, I tend to agree in some cases that some of the pushback on campus behavior is really just trying to tamp down anything that's anti-Israel. But I think specifically in the case of the question that went viral for Claudine Gay, Liz McGill, and the MIT president is calling for the genocide of Jewish people a violation of campus policy. And basically they equivocated and they waffled and they said that it depends on the context. And to me, that should be just an easy yes. Yes, this is in violation of campus policy. And so that was really what led to their downfall, was the fact that they had apparently spent hours workshopping their answers with lawyers and still couldn't come up with something better than whatever it is that they said, which was very deeply unsatisfying. And then on the point about the plagiarism with Bill Ackman's wife, I would point out that in the cases that were floating around from Business Insider in that report on her, she did cite the individual in a paragraph notation right after the paragraph that she was accused of not using quotations on. She immediately apologized for any oversight. and promised to go back and rework the material to make sure that everything was properly attributed. But most importantly, she's not a university president. She doesn't even work in the university system anymore. Claudine Gay was the president of perhaps the most prestigious university in the United States of America. So to me, there's just no excuse for her being in her position to have any semblance of plagiarism. When you compare the paragraphs, the 50 plus paragraphs, by the way, that were not properly cited, not even just without quotation marks, but she didn't even include a parenthetical citation immediately afterwards like Bill Ackman's wife did. But these are clear violations of Harvard campus policy. If any student were caught plagiarizing even once, let alone 50 plus times in this manner, there's no chance that they would be able to continue at the institution. And this is in addition to the fact that Claudine Gay already had a very thin body of scholarly research before she was appointed to the president position. So there's a question as to whether or not she was even qualified for the job in the first place. And to me, I think that her being demoted to a professor position where she's still receiving this $900,000 a year salary is pretty outrageous. And I'm sure we could probably talk in another segment, too, about why a university president is making nearly $1 million a year when so many students are struggling to pay for tuition. But I'll kick it back to you, Jess.
Yeah, I think in Claudine Gay's case, as someone who's been a graduate student who's written three theses before, there's a process that you go through where you have your thesis picked apart and read by scholars in your field. And so Claudine Gay didn't, paraphrase anyone's writing that she didn't directly cite. There are parts of large research papers where you're reviewing other scholars' work and ideas. It's very commonplace for scholars in that field to recognize that the writing is coming from, someone who's a legacy founder of that field. And it's just generally understood that that's their work. This is extremely common. And so when her thesis was reviewed by, I'm sure, very many people, and they found that there was nothing wrong with it, and it was accepted as her doctoral thesis, and then Harvard again reviewed, according to their code of conduct, her thesis and determined that, this really didn't violate their code of conduct. She wasn't stealing ideas. She was grappling with them and on occasion paraphrased with ideas that came from other authors that she did cite in her paper. I think that's why they found no violation here. I just think that, her not writing a lot of, scholarly work in her time as a professor before becoming president, it's not a red flag for me because I know most people who rise to leadership positions in universities. I was a student at Harvard, for part of my time when I was a graduate student at Brown. You're allowed to cross-register. Harvard's the kind of school similar to Brown where the type of people in administrative positions are not people that are publishing a lot of research. They're people who are interacting with students more. And they're people who are in administrative positions, gaining the experience needed to be in leadership of the university. They're interacting with students more than they're interacting with research journals. And so I don't think that's a red flag for me. That's pretty common for people coming to leadership positions and now finding out that this was all an effort by, a pro-Israel group. It really makes a lot of sense to me because it just doesn't feel right that she would be accused of committing intense plagiarism considering all of the facts.
I guess I would push back on the idea that she just cited people or paraphrased people while not attributing immediately close enough to the paragraph. I mean, based on the passages that I've read, it seems like she cited the people in the paper on a general basis, but didn't indicate that those paraphrased pieces were taken from their work. And then my understanding as well is that her scholarly output was significantly lower than pretty much any other Harvard president, which is why it kind of stuck out to me. But we're going to have to leave it there. More rising after this.